Hello and welcome to episode 181 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. Welcome to the podcast that covers the race between climate change and the technology that will stop it. This week, Robert Llewellyn assembles a crack team to bust the myths your uncle is spreading on social media. Turns out Rowan Atkinson is a bigger idiot than the character he's most famous for.
A wind farm in Kansas has set a new standard with technology to limit light pollution. It's called a light switch. Okay, it's a little more complicated than that, but it's basically a light switch.
The IEA says the energy transition will use far less resources than a business-as-usual fossil fuel world. Turns out every right-wing politician in the world is a bigger idiot than the character Rowan Atkinson is most famous for.
Swedish battery maker Northvolt is opening a massive battery cell factory in Quebec, Canada. The plant is being helped by a multi-billion-dollar government subsidy. We asked the Canadian government for a subsidy for this podcast, and they wouldn't even give us a lousy $1 billion.
Is that so much to ask? All that and more on this edition of The Clean Energy Show. And also on this week's show, a better route planner is indeed a better route planner, Brian. A hydrogen station shuts down in California. Turns out NIMBYism is much stronger for some renewable energy sources than others. And the world's northernmost solar farm.
All right, so, I often have repairs going on at my house because I guess it's falling apart. It's that kind of age. So I'm expecting a plumber today. We had a leak this morning. And so I probably have to stop recording the podcast to go talk to the plumber for a sec. And then once he's here, it's like, once again, it's right by the bomb shelter.
Oh, no.
So we may hear some banging around, and we're getting some carpets installed as well upstairs, but I think they're off for lunch, so I don't think we're going to hear them.
What number of podcasts will we have to reach before you don't have your guys around always constantly working and doing things?
Yeah, it's been kind of crazy, but, within a couple of months, we're going to hopefully be done, just about everything. And we did another thing. We put in a high-efficiency fireplace insert.
Right.
So we have a lovely home that has a fireplace. It's a mid-century modern bungalow, and it's got a lovely fireplace up in the living room. It's got Tyndallstone and limestone. It's a really gorgeous fireplace. And we've always thought about maybe putting in a high-efficiency insert because it's just an old-fashioned fireplace from 1962, and those are not very efficient. But, we don't use it that often. We don't really burn a fire all that often. Just, a few times in the winter, it's nice to have a fire going. But anyway, we decided to finally do it, is put in a high-efficiency fireplace insert. It's going to be wood-burning. We're only going to use it a few times a year, but once we do actually burn the wood, it will, throw off some real heat. And, we might do it, when it gets to minus 40 to help out the air source heat pump as well, perhaps.
Yeah, if it doesn't keep up, you can always throw in a log, just like the olden days. But tell me, I don't understand what an insert is. It is a new fireplace over an old one. Is that fair to say? They basically
stick it right in. It's and then they do something in the chimney as well, like an insert in the chimney. But it's, it just comes from the factory pretty much set that they just shove it in and, they got to seal it all up and seal the new, chimney thing. It's something like 90% of the heat in an old-fashioned fireplace just goes straight up the chimney and out the house. So it does not do a whole lot of good. Is there a fan or
something that works with it?
And yeah, there's a fan as well. It's just a fan. So you plug it into the wall and it will blow the heat into the room. But it's not up to code yet, so we haven't been able to use it.
Oh.
The old fireplace, is not up to code, so we have to put some tile on the floor underneath it. Like the hearth is not large enough to fit current code, so we got to put some tile on the floor and then about 6 inches of tile above the fireplace as well.
Okie dokie. I brought that air purifier that was on Wirecutter. And
because it's smoky all the time and the air inside your house is gross.
I have an oil refinery nearby, and I'll talk a bit about that again later briefly. But the thing went off last night because my wife put some groceries down on a spray paint can, and we couldn't figure out where the stink was coming up, but it actually smelled like the refinery. My nose was detecting VOCs galore, and the air purifier went into high gear. It changed its color. It knew something wrong was afoul. And,
okay, so it has sensors.
It has a
so
sensor,
it can detect.
yes, and it works impressively well, is what I'm here to tell you.
Wow, that's cool.
Brian, I have a remarkable medical update for myself, James Whittingham. And it's not the announcement of my impending death, as you might expect. It's actually
that's what I was expecting.
It's actually good news. Last week, I looked at the video of our show, and I looked terrible. And I probably look marginally better this week. But suffice it to say that last week's show was my low point in my life for physical health. The next day, I went down to the hospital. I went to the front counter, and the guy at the front counter at admitting said, "I know why you're here." He recognized my bag, which had CPAP equipment in it from a test that I'd done 18 months ago. I was there to pick up my CPAP machine. So I went upstairs to the sleep clinic and spent about half an hour getting a CPAP machine brand new. They informed me that my apnea was so severe in the sleep test at the hospital last month that I require a special $5,000 machine. So I was going there prepared to pay $275 for basically a rental of it for 5 years or however long it lasted. Then I pay another $275, which is, if you're listening in a lot of places in the world, that's not the UK or Europe or Japan. Okay, a lot of places that's United States. That's got to sound like a sweet deal because I don't have special health coverage to cover it. I do have my wife's health plan, which will cover some of the supplies for it and a small amount of money. But I got it for free because I'm special, because I was so bad that I'm basically, I'm not getting a handicap sticker or anything, but I practically deserve one because it is so severe that the test found 30 episodes of stopping breathing per hour, 34, which is severe obstructive sleep apnea. And the hospital said it was in the 80s. And they said they only give out one of these special machines 2 or 3 times per 100 regular machines.
Wow.
So I'm that special.
James, I am so lucky you're still alive.
Well, basically that's true, Brian. And to make that point come home, when I picked up my daughter, she was in distress. I went from the hospital to pick up my daughter from school because her favorite teacher and my son who's graduated, one of their favorite teachers of all time, her husband that day died suddenly teaching an elementary school class. And he's not only my age, but he looks like me, except healthier. So it just goes to show that, this condition I had, which I wasn't going to talk about, and I was kind of embarrassed about, I'm now telling everyone who will listen because I'm so happy that my life has changed. You see, what was going on is you would wake up in the morning and not know that you didn't sleep if you're not familiar with this old man condition. And, I have a friend my age who's had it for 20 years, but he was a smoker. Jay, I'm sure he's not embarrassed to say, but, he's on the machine and he loves to talk about it too. So he's very happy for me. And I was even talking about it with somebody in their 80s yesterday in Saskatoon. So, we're comparing notes.
And so the CPAP machine, it hooks up to your nose, I think, and then it just blows air in and makes sure that you keep breathing through the night. Is that right?
That's a simplification of it. It's a constant pressure, but in my case, my machine is a bi-level machine where it'll give a good hard push if I stop breathing.
Wow.
So, and it doesn't seem that hard, but I mean, if you take the mask off, there's a lot of air that blows out. And my challenge is that I'm using it just in my nose, because I don't want to shave. Although it's worth it. I mean, to expose my ugly face to have a better health. So I may do that if necessary. But if you open your mouth, air comes out like a horror movie, like,
right.
And I've slept a couple of segments like that, with air coming out and your mouth is really dry and you have to wake up and close your trap and make sure it stays.
Yeah, well, some of them have like a sort of a humidifier in them, right?
Yeah, this one does too. It has a humidifier, so I fill it with distilled water every night. And I took it to Saskatoon with me and used it in a hotel. Long story short is the nitty gritty, the dirty details is that I got up to go to the bathroom every 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes all night long. And the reason is because the guy said that, when you stop breathing, your body releases stress hormones to get your lungs to kick in to gasp.
Mm-hmm.
But you're sitting there not breathing. And my wife observed this in me. So you basically have such a crappy quality of life. And I'm sure you've noticed my cognitive decline over the course of this podcast, because that's
well, it was pretty low to begin with.
Yeah.
So that's,
but
hard
it
to
has
say,
gotten lower. It's been a problem basically since the pandemic. That's kind of where the point where I was really starting to be tired in the daytime. And, we tried different things. We did lots of medical tests. Anyway, I've been sleeping for 6-7 hours at a stretch, which is unheard of for me. And then I go back to sleep and get some more.
Wow.
And, if you've not slept hardly at all for a week, if you're working or doing something crazy and then you have a big sleep, you don't feel 100% right away. It takes a while. So my body is going to have to start to recover and catch up on its repairs and things but I was at such an all-time low. I was counting the seconds to my CPAP appointment, whereas before I was like, I gotta do something else and not this because I don't like this. But no, I'm just really grateful to be back here, and I feel, compared to last week, I feel alive, alert, pretty darn good. So
wow, it's great to have you back in the land of the living. That's amazing.
By the new year, I expect to be a new James, so you can call me New James from now on.
Okay.
So on the weekend, I took a trip to Saskatoon via Moose Jaw. That's about a 2.5-hour drive. Saskatoon is our sister city, which is much better than us and has all kinds of wonderful things, which I tried out.
They're so much sexier in Saskatoon.
Oh, yes. But I stopped at a funeral in Moose Jaw, which is about an hour's drive to from my home to the church or whatever it was. I used a better route planner. Remember, I'm using a better route planner with Android Auto, so it's on my screen in my car. I'm trying to replicate the Tesla experience the best I can. So I paid for the subscription for that, which is like €7 a month or something. I don't know what that translates into, but for now,
that's about $400.
Stop it. See, last week, James might have bought into that. But this week, James, a little sharper. Yeah, I'm using it with a dongle that plugs into the computer port on the car, just this little thing, and it connects to Bluetooth on your phone, and it uses the app to get the live battery data and the consumption, and it gives you a very accurate reading. So when I set out for Moose Jaw, it said that I would use 25% of my battery. And I didn't believe that because last time I went to Moose Jaw, it used more than that. But it ended up only using 21% of my battery. So it was, I had a bit of a tailwind. It was, 11 degrees Celsius instead of freezing-ish, around freezing last time. Yeah, so I was very impressed with that. But the big test, Brian, was when we turned north to go to the other city, because when we came out of the funeral after an hour and a half, it was pouring rain, and it never stopped pouring rain. And the wind had shifted, a front had moved in, and there was this 30 to 50 kilometer an hour headwind. Very different situation. So I thought if it survives this, then it really is using weather data, and it really is being smart. And yeah, it did. It nailed it. It nailed my next stop, which was a charging station in Davidson, because I wanted to stop there to support the Riverbend Co-op for the first time. And, because they're the only people who were progressive enough to put a charger in a very necessary place in Saskatchewan. And yeah, so it worked. I mean, I'm so thoroughly impressed because this solves a huge problem for me. You don't know what it's like to be a non-Tesla driver with an EV on the highway. You're just doing calculations and logarithms and slide rules and all kinds of things, trying to figure out, are you going to make it? This solves that. And furthermore, it is advantageous for me to actually pull in at a lower state of charge and have the confidence to do that, because the charging curve for my Bolt, it's a slow charge. So it's going to charge more if you have a drained battery than if you have like a quarter of a battery, it'd be better at like 5% than it would be, because you'll actually spend less time.
Well, it's always a bit of a drag if I roll into a charger and I've got about 40% battery, because you just never get that top speed. You got to be down to 20%.
But I have total confidence now. I'm very curious to see what it's going to be like in really cold Canadian weather that we have here. To see, because it did lower its estimate by 1% when I turned up the heat in the cabin.
Yep.
So, but then it did it fairly soon. Like the calculation wasn't a surprise or anything. It was there, but it hit it bang on. And that is tremendous confidence for driving. It's like when I did my Vancouver trip in the summer, very long trip, many days there and back, I was constantly calculating when my son drove. Like I was, trying to be cool, but I was constantly, searching and doing and sweating at some points. Well, this is totally fixes everything. It takes the thinking away. And I highly recommend it. Now, I've heard, people say they didn't work out for them as well or as accurate with other cars. And to them, I say, have you inputted all the settings properly? Like if you go into your settings, you can customize it.
In a better route planner.
Generally, a car is considered, the weight of the car plus like 180 pounds or 160 pound driver or something like that. So anything in excess of that, you can add there. It has to be in kilograms, I think. I'm not sure, but you could figure it out. And I did that. I put my own massive weight in and my family's and some luggage. And I also said what speed I would drive at. So I told it basically I would drive 101% of the speed limit. So, because I wanted to just see how it worked with the speed. But on the way home, I had lots extra and it was, I overestimated too. So I said, well, I could just burn off some of that extra juice with some speed increases. But it turns out that the weather was so poor, I didn't want to go faster than the speed limit anyway. Yeah. But yeah, it was just fantastic. And I want to say a shout out to the Riverbend Co-op in Davidson, Saskatchewan. What a great place. Charged up there. And the other charger was in French again, like it was in Swift Current in my other trip. So I phoned them and this guy couldn't fix it, but he's put a ticket on fixing it because I saw it on PlugShare. And I always use PlugShare. I log in whenever I'm charging just to help other people out. I did that at the hotel as well. The hotel that was so good that Brian Stockton actually stays there from time to time is the Holiday Inn Express College, which is full of academics and sports teams, university sports teams, as opposed to rednecks and farmers, which is what I'm used to at my other hotels and semi-homeless people. But yeah, it was a nice hotel. It had 3 chargers, 2 in the parkade and 1 outside at the wall of the building that had a lock on it. So you had to go to the front desk and ask them to come out. But unlike other hotels that I've been at, they knew about it. They said, yeah, we know where it is. It's there. It's all good. It's not something that's foreign to us. And as you said, they're probably getting a lot of users because they have the most EV chargers in that city of a hotel.
It's probably the number one destination for people for looking for that.
When I got to the 2 EV charger stalls in the parkade, or parking, what would Americans call a parkade or anyone else?
Well, parking garage or...
Parking garage, okay. It was like a lower level of parking garage. There was a Outlander PHEV, like the plug-in electric hybrid, so it has a small battery, but it was parked there for our whole stay, both days, plugged in to its tiny little battery, which I'm sure took maybe 2.5 hours at most to charge.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got a free charge. So my trip cost, less than $10. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
And, there's this program from our power utility that I signed up for where they're testing how EV drivers, it was on the Facebook group.
Mm-hmm.
And I signed up for it. Some people had trouble because the system broke down, but they're going to pay practically rebate half of the electricity you use for EV charging. Plus give you $10 a month per car, plus give you $25 signing bonus at the beginning. So all told, that's going to cut if that comes and works out and I'm not kicked out of the system for some reason, because I'm not a friend of SAS Power. I've criticized them a lot publicly. But if it works out, I'll get, my already cheap EV driving. I can go to Saskatoon for like $3 or $4 instead of $7 or $8.
Right. So they're trying to collect data for the EV revolution.
Now, if it's a Tesla, I think they use the Tesla cell network somehow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the wall chargers have Wi-Fi, the cars have Wi-Fi. So maybe they can do that.
But with me, if I had OnStar or something, I think they would use that. But they're going to send me a device. I don't know if it's like the same type of dongle that I'm using for a better route planner that it plugs into your computer, or if it's something that plugs in to your charger. But either way, I've got 2 EVs, and I'm looking forward to that, because what they're trying to assess is how's it going to work when EVs take off and the power grid is, put more demand. Can we encourage people, incentivize them to charge at night? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
If you pay for half your gas, if your gas is half as much at night and you can get it in your driveway, then yeah, of course you're going to do that.
Yes. And eventually they're going to go to smart meters, and eventually we will have time of day pricing here.
Yes. They're spreading out the time of day meter, or pardon me, the smart meters. I'm talking to other people who are getting them.
Yeah.
Recently. By the way, we were talking last week about the Chevy app also does this. It will try to route plan for you. No. Does not work well. Does not work. I would be stranded if it's very optimistic.
And you'd have to pay for the OnStar service to get that or something?
No. I can use it in my phone app, but I can't, I can't use it on the car screen.
Okay.
But I can use it in my phone app, and it did not work well. It was way off.
Okay. So you could actually use both at the same time to compare.
I could, yes.
Yeah.
And no, not good at all. And it claims to use terrain and live weather too, but no, I'm sorry, it does not.
Okay. Well, that's a great tip for anyone with a Bolt. You got to get the dongle and then a better route planner, and it's the James method. Yeah.
A better route planner is you have to pay the monthly fee to have it on your screen, and to have the dongle, and to have the live weather. So those three things. So you can't just have the dongle and not pay for the, some people I think are doing that. They have not the premium version. They have the dongle, but the dongle's actually not working. Anyway, love it. And Chevy is also saying on their app that ChargePoint and EV Go is now plug and go, plug and charge. So I'm hoping that continues to spread. And then I'll, as I continue to seek the Tesla experience, that would be a lovely thing if, say, Flo or somebody like that in Canada, where I am, had it, and, you just plug in and go. Yeah. Although it's not that bad not doing it. But I mean, I basically plug in and put a thing on the screen to beep the thing and go. So it's not a huge deal most of the time, but it would be nice.
Okay, so moving on to our first story here. This is from Kansas, and this is reported by Electrek. And a new wind farm in Kansas has light mitigating technology. So we often talk on the show about how people have lots of complaints about clean energy solutions. They accept the fossil fuel infrastructure because it's been there for 100 years. But when you put up like a wind farm, people complain. And I guess if you do live near a large wind farm, that this probably would get annoying, but they have to have flashing lights on them because you don't want airplanes to run into them.
Yeah, we had a cell phone tower go up fairly near our house, which we've been dreading and predicting would happen. But there's no light on it. It's been there for a year, and I've been waiting for the light because that'll really make it unpleasant.
Well, maybe it has this system. So this system that they're using on this wind farm in Kansas, so this is a 200 megawatt wind farm. It powers about 70,000 homes. They're using radar to scan for aircraft. So all the wind turbines, they all have lights on them.
But is that reliable? As an aviation expert, Brian, if it fails, you're going to run into a wind turbine, and that's not going to be pleasant.
If it fails, it's going to be a problem. But it uses a radar to scan for aircraft, and it only turns the lights on when there's aircraft that is at or below 1,000 feet above the tallest wind turbine. So that's when it's, when it triggers the system, and then all of the flashing lights go on.
That's fascinating. Can you imagine if you're flying, though? I mean, maybe you can't, but I mean, you could imagine flying a plane in the dark and all of a sudden, poof, the entire wind farm lights up.
Yeah.
And you poop your pants.
And of course, this sort of makes me nervous too. It's like, well, I hope this system works. But I would also assume that these wind farms are not necessarily near an airport. And if it was like a crop dusting airplane, you're only going to do that during the daytime, I assume. I don't know a lot about crop dusting, but there is a ton of wind power in Kansas. Kansas is kind of like the Saskatchewan of America. It's a rolling prairie with lots of wheat. That's what we have here, and it's perfect for wind power. So 47% of Kansas's net electricity generation in 2022 was from wind. It's a huge deal in Kansas.
Well, I'm actually surprised by this. This is actually kind of cool.
Yeah, and it makes Kansas a good place to test out this system because they have so many wind turbines. And, I imagine they would be fairly visible in the big flat landscape that they've got.
I never understand why people object to solar farms in a place like where we live that's flat. Because you can easily not even notice them, like you might say, well, what crop is that? It's dark. Is it canola? What is that? It doesn't, it's not an eyesore, and it doesn't necessarily reflect a lot of light most times of the day or ever, perhaps, depending on where it's located. So
no, and when I drove through South Dakota, I noted all of the flaring, gas wells, and that light is of the burning flame goes on 24 hours. But it's a fairly unpopulated areas. Often those are in fairly unpopulated areas.
Well, that's good because that will help. That will help with all the NIMBYism that is coming for renewables. And I wonder if you could set it off with a drone.
I guess we could go to Kansas and find out.
That'd be cool to just test out, wouldn't it? If any listener out there wants to do it. Anyway, Busting EV Myths, the Fully Charged show on their YouTube channel, convened a panel of experts to address the EV myths that are in the world, which is why I brought Rowan Atkinson up, because the person who plays, what's his name? What's his character? Mr. Bean?
Mr. Bean.
He wrote an op-ed that got a lot of attention that said, I used to love EVs, but I've changed my mind, and everybody who wants to latch on to negative things was right there. So there's lots going around. I'm not always exposed to them. My kid, who isn't living in a bubble as much as me, always tells me what the world is thinking.
Yeah.
And he's anxious to do it because he thinks that I'm avoiding everything. So yeah, he tells me all the crap that's going around, even in engineering school and university, like some of the rural people, they really go down rabbit holes of negativity that are all false, which is frightening because people who are, building bridges, you want them to be competent. People who are doctors, you want them to fix you, not, believe in leeches or something. So EVs are dirty for the environment. 2020 Volvo report, that's the car company, said it would take 10 years to pay back the debt of what an EV does to the environment. However, like we've said many times on the show, whenever that happens, they often don't account for, the gas just magically shows up and burns clean in a gas car when they're comparing the two. They don't account for the refining, which is mining of gasoline, the transfer and refining, which is incredibly energy intense. And by the way, I learned from this thing that cobalt is used in oil refining for gas and diesel to take the sulfur out.
Yeah.
Not a lot of it, and they do reuse it a certain extent, but there is cobalt used. That's one of the big complaints. Oh, cobalt. We can't use cobalt.
Yes, because it's used in batteries. That's horrible, but used in fossil fuels as well.
So if you took the emissions from all the renewable industries over the next 30 years, Brian, everything, batteries, solar, wind, cars, electric cars, that would amount for 6 months of emissions from the fossil fuel industry right now.
Yeah.
And yet, too dirty, can't do it. It's all bull crap.
So people do complain. Making a solar panel does have a carbon footprint. Making an electric car does have a carbon footprint. But, 6 months of emissions from the fossil fuel industry equals 30 years of emissions from the clean energy, which all get better over time because the grid gets cleaner every year.
It's crazy. So the batteries are bad for the environment,
says a myth.
Former president and current criminal Donald J. Trump spoke in Michigan last week about the threat of EV batteries and how bad they are. So here's his remarks as read by a porn star.
People have no idea how bad this is going to be, also for the environment. Those batteries, when they get rid of them and lots of bad things happen, and when they're digging it out of the ground to make those batteries, it's going to be very bad for the environment.
Some of the late night comedy shows have used children to reread Trump quotes, and it sounds more appropriate in their mouths than it does in an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course he's latching on to this, and everybody who follows him is saying, oh, good, something negative. Let's hate this. So the supply chain, for what they miss out is that the supply chain, it's kind of the worst case scenarios that people use. You can decarbonize the battery supply chain. You can use renewable electricity in the mines, for example, and you can recycle batteries. Apple is recycling the cobalt in their batteries now and only going to use recycled cobalt. And you can reuse batteries. So none of that is talked about. So in the Congo, which is the issue that everyone brings up with child labor, and it's the Chinese companies making batteries there that are not being careful about, the labor situations.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, you can make an average of $2 a day in the Congo, but if you work in the mines, you make $3 a day. And that's okay if you want to do that and make more money. Shouldn't be an issue, they're saying. You have to understand the quality of life there and how important it is to some people to do that. But the thing is, it's kind of a byproduct. Cobalt's a byproduct of nickel and copper. When you're mining that stuff, you get cobalt. So you're going to get it anyway. And they're actually expecting a surplus of cobalt by 2030 because batteries are using less and less of it. There's chemistries that use none, and they're greatly reducing the amount of cobalt, and then also recycling it all. So cobalt is economical to recycle because it is so expensive. So that makes it the first candidate for recycling in there. So another myth is EVs burn. They don't. I've heard ICE vehicles are 10 times more likely to burn, but they used figures from a study that said they're 19 times more likely to catch fire.
Yeah. And batteries
ahead.
do catch fire, and when they do catch fire, it is a nasty, nasty fire that's difficult to put out. One of those big battery stations in Australia, Tesla's got a few of those giant grid storage batteries, and one of them did catch fire the other day. This is one of the biggest installations, but it was isolated to just one group, like one container of batteries, and it was bad, and we need to figure out how to mitigate this. But nothing compared to the explosions and fires that happen in the fossil fuel industries.
The batteries they use for grid storage don't need to be the expensive high energy density kind, and that's the kind that doesn't need cobalt and doesn't burn. Like there's the sodium ion battery. I'm looking forward to that in homes, if you're having a battery in your home, for instance, in the future, and things like that. People also say tire and air pollution, because tires disintegrate and EVs are heavier, as we all know, but they're not actually. Generally speaking, the 10th heaviest vehicle in the UK registered is the Tesla Model X. The 11th is the Tesla. So all the top 10 are ICE vehicles. Gas and diesel vehicles, because they're just big, right?
And they're just getting bigger and bigger every year.
And it's certainly in North America, that is very much the case. They're, if you're going to worry about heavy vehicles, well, I guess we got to ban pickup trucks, buddy.
Yeah.
Sorry. So the theory that goes around on social media is that there's more tire pollution, and so it's particulate pollution from tires. Well, they found that EV tires actually don't disintegrate faster. And as far as the brake dust from brake pads go, the asbestos and everything in brake pads, I haven't used my brakes. I may have never used my brakes except because I was told that you have to use them or they'll rust, they'll corrode. So I slam them on every couple of weeks, or try to, in the Bolt, because it's got such aggressive regenerative braking, even on hills. Like the brake pads are going to last the life of the car if I, keep them rust free from slamming them on every once in a while. It's crazy.
And meanwhile, gas cars are using the brakes all the time, and they're wearing down and putting particulate into the world.
So the other one is the grid is going to collapse. Well, that's not true. Robert Llewellyn said that every time he does an interview with a grid operator and asks them about that, they say, can the grid handle EVs? And the answer is yes. They don't elaborate. Yes, of course it is. It's a transition. It's not something that just happens over a cliff all at once. I mean, we expect it to continue to speed up, but it's still not something that they're going to get caught off guard with.
Yeah, and there are going to be issues. I mean, I've heard that, if every house in a neighborhood upgrades to, say, 200 amp service, like I did, if everybody wanted to do that on the same day, there may not be enough power for the whole neighborhood. But of course, this happens gradually. I'm the first one to do it on the block. And over the next 10 years, I do expect more people doing that.
but if 10 of your neighbors do it, maybe they say, okay, this is the trend, and then they upgrade that for the next 10, and it's not holding them back.
I did it, and as soon as a couple other people in my neighborhood do it, they're going to notice the trend.
Yeah. So charging infrastructure, that is, something that you and I worry about too, because we live in a vast land of Canada in the center here where there's not a lot of infrastructure of anything really. But even that has caught up. I mean, we're getting one of our a couple of our dark spots are getting filled in by Tesla chargers and a couple of flow chargers.
Soon,
so we'll be pretty good shape in that regard as far as highway trips go. It could be better. I mean, they could be more frequent just so you have more options and have to think less, but that'll come in time as more people have EVs. But it is evolving fast. It is a lot better than it was last year. It's a lot better than it was 5 years ago everywhere in the first world here where we're talking about. The ranges of cars, as you know, are getting longer. You bought a longer range car and you have less need for chargers now. There's less of a concern. And of course, 90% of people charge at home, as I do, and you do, and except if I go on a highway trip. And even, at a hotel, I'm charging at the hotel, so that's not needing something on the highway because I got 100% there.
Yeah, you don't need as many EV charges as you do gas pumps because people don't fill up with gas at their homes. 90% of the time, you're charging at home, maybe even 95 or 100%, depending on what you use your EV for.
And lastly, they're too expensive. And of course, if you look at the cost of ownership, a lot of times it's cheaper to buy an EV right now. And that is changing very quickly.
Yeah, there's some incentives which help. Always look in your province or state to see what, there's a big federal incentive in the US and in Canada, but sometimes states and provinces have even more, but yeah, when you include the whole cost of ownership, and I did this too when I bought my first Tesla, I sort of did the math. And I don't drive that much. So if you drive a lot, it makes the math make more sense. But I did roughly think, well, if I keep this Tesla for 10 years, it will definitely be cheaper than, a Toyota Camry or whatever would be the comparable car. And it just gets better every year.
That's right.
Coming up later on the Clean Energy Show, more myth busting, this time on the myths of the energy transition. Back to you, Brian Stockton.
Excellent. Thank you, whoever that was.
That was Rob Lee, the voice of the Mythbusters series in North America. And
generated
he's a Canadian.
By AI?
Oh, yeah. Well, he was unreachable.
I just, to be clear, so that he doesn't sue us or something.
Sorry. Consider everything AI on every show, on everything you hear from now on.
Including me and James.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a Canadian story here, Northvolt, which is a Swedish battery maker. We've had lots of announcements here in Canada about the kind of battery supply chain, particularly in Quebec, which has a lot of the minerals needed for batteries. But now this is a full-blown battery cell factory that's been announced for Quebec, Canada. Now, we don't have the Inflation Reduction Act like they have in America, which is basically the law now. It's a massive spending bill that supports subsidies for these kinds of industries. And we don't have something similar in Canada, but the government can still go ahead and just make deals with people to kind of basically match the subsidies that are happening with the Inflation Reduction Act in the US. So this is a case of that. Now, I'm not going to quote the total figures here because there was sort of conflicting figures on what I read on the internet, but the gist is it is a massive, massive government subsidy. It's sounding like it's about a $7 billion factory. And depending on what you read on different stories, it's like at least $5 billion in subsidies from the Canadian government, possibly more. Wow. The Canadian government is really on the hook for this battery factory in Quebec. But Quebec also, of course, has lots of clean electricity already because it's pretty much entirely powered by hydroelectric power. So anytime somebody can build a big factory like this and know that all the electricity that they're going to be using is all clean, that makes everybody happy. So that's just an added bonus for what they're going to get building batteries with this $7 billion factory in Quebec.
It makes me a bit nervous, but as we've said before, they will pay for themselves if it takes 20 years.
Yeah.
As long as they pay for themselves, I'm okay, because it's going to spur, we want to be a part of the clean transition. We want to be not left behind. And I think that's what the Biden administration is thinking too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, if you're not part of it, the amount of jobs in the clean transition is vastly more than the jobs lost in the fossil fuel industry.
Yeah.
And we want a piece of that pie.
Yeah. And yeah, I always get a bit nervous when the subsidies are that high, when it's when the government's putting that much money in, but it's for such a good eventual outcome. This is obviously what we need to do, because we need to switch to clean energy as fast as possible to avoid the worst parts of climate change. Okay, so a couple of weeks ago, we reported on hydrogen fueling stations in Denmark that were going to be shut down, and they only had a couple of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in Denmark that were going to be affected by this, and one of them was a taxi company that was going to have to figure out what to do with their 100 hydrogen fueled cars. But in any case, so this is in California. So about half of the hydrogen fueling stations in California are currently offline because they just couldn't get enough hydrogen for them. So it's the same kind of thing. There's not that many vehicles. There's a few hundred, and California is really the only state in the U.S. that even has a hydrogen infrastructure. So hydrogen fuel cell cars are really only sold in California in the U.S. But about half of them are now powered down because they're just a supply problem, and they're hoping to get them back open again. But of course, this is going to be one of those issues with hydrogen fuel cell cars. It's such a massive infrastructure spend that, in places like California, I really see this as a test project. They're just trying it out. Hey, let's try out this hydrogen thing. Let's see if it works. And not that this one shortage is enough to kind of shut the whole thing down, but when you can plug in your car at home and charge it up, it's going to be very difficult for hydrogen to compete, as we've said before on the show.
I can charge my car up for about $8 or $9, and it'd be more than twice that in California.
Well, yeah,
they do have cheaper gas prices, but I'm looking here and it says the Toyota Mirai is about $180 to fill it right now because of the shortage of hydrogen.
Yeah,
it was $100, which is bad enough, because if you're used to cheaper U.S. gas, then that's not great either. But yeah, they're more broken than the electrical charging stations.
Yeah, the price for the hydrogen has gone up. So yeah, Toyota Mirai, one of the few hydrogen vehicles, $180 to fill in California, which that's not great.
No. And it makes no sense. Toyota and Honda's backing off from hydrogen, but still there's some proponents around the world that still think that light passenger vehicles should go hydrogen. I mean, first of all, you would need everyone to go hydrogen to make the hydrogen cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you need everyone to buy small modular nuclear reactors to make it to the price that you want it to be and think it can be. And hydrogen itself is probably going to, over time, be manufactured enough for other things. We don't know how that's going to play out, but hopefully it'll come down in price. But it's not going to, electric cars are going to be covering the planet by then.
Yeah, with everybody buying EVs, that's really the problem for hydrogen. Once we're getting to the kind of penetration levels where the VHS versus beta war is basically over.
By the way, if you're new to the show, EVs are fantastic.
Yes.
Brian has 2. I have 2. I love them. We love them. They're I can't get over it. It never stops becoming such a great thing to get in a car and have the electric drive experience. It's just lovely. So the International Energy Agency is busting 10 prominent myths, again with the myths, that are misleading society about the energy transition. And this is from Clean Technica, who reported on this. 1, the energy transition is cheaper than business as usual, which is a a fact, not a myth, but a fact that breaks the myth that is basically the opposite of that. Conventional thinking argues that the capital costs of the energy transition are too high, but you'll also need to look at the cost of the fuel too. As you always say, if you pay off the capital, the fuel is free. The sunshine's free, the wind's free, a little bit of maintenance on wind turbines, of course. And the IEA looked at both capital costs and operational costs and noted that when you combine them, the energy transition will cost $12 trillion less than the business as usual scenario. So we're actually saving money, Brian. Huge gobs of money. I mean, $1 trillion is a lot.
The sooner we do it, the more money we save.
So whilst capital costs are higher, the ongoing savings from high fossil fuel prices more than outweigh this. In short, saving the planet is cheaper than destroying it. Here's another one. We are building enough grids, and they say we're not. Well, conventional thinking looks at the opposition to the building of new grids, which is, nobody wants a new, power line through their neighborhood, but it does count the successes, those areas where the grid does get built. The IEA takes a dispassionate look at the totals. They calculate that we need to build 1.25 million miles of grids every year versus the average for the last 5 years of 1.2 million miles per year.
Almost the same.
It's a little bit more. And yes, they say, yes, that little bit more will be hard. It's not going to be completely easy, but it's certainly doable and it's certainly manageable. And it's just everything's overblown and it's really hard to communicate to people. I mean, I'm not an expert on everything that we talk about here. Obviously, I can't, continually tell people at the Thanksgiving dinner table what's right and what's wrong because
you barely had brain function until this week.
Exactly. I couldn't recite my middle name, for God's sake, this time last week. So jobs of the 65 million people working in the energy sector, half already work in clean energy already. And the expansion of the renewable system will create far more jobs than are lost in the fossil fuel systems. The IEA calculates that by 2030, there will be 30 million new jobs in clean energy versus 13 million jobs lost in fossil fuels. So, yeah, I mean, I don't, no one wants to lose their job and change professions, but, more jobs is good for society, obviously. So the total amount of resources needed for a renewable economy is 2/3 less than those required to run the current fossil fuel economy. The reason why is that electrons and the infrastructure needed to move them around is much lighter than the 15 billion tons of fossil fuels we use every year. Pretty simple stuff, Brian.
Yeah, and the fossil fuel system is inefficient. So we're constantly burning fossil fuels and getting a lot of waste heat. And that's, energy that's just not used. But clean energy is just more efficient. You get the energy from the sun, it goes into a battery, goes into a car. Massive, massive gains in efficiency. So we need less energy overall.
So the world's northernmost solar farm, where is it? I can't even guess.
Yes. Well, this is in Norway.
Aha.
So,
Norway.
Very near the North Pole. So Norway goes up near the North Pole, just like Canada does.
Seriously?
Yeah.
The North Pole.
Near the North Pole. So, what, aside from the cold, what do you imagine might be one of the biggest challenges or issues with solar that's that far north?
Well, I know Santa Claus doesn't have any sunlight in the wintertime up at the North Pole.
Yeah.
Because there's, the midnight sun or in the summertime and no sun in the wintertime.
Yes. The land of the midnight sun. This is, Canada is sometimes referred to as the land of the midnight sun, but so is Norway because we have land up there near the North Pole. And one, of course, is also the angle of the sun, right? So when you're that far north, your solar panels have to be almost vertical just because of the angle that the sun
Put them on the walls of the buildings if there is any buildings. Put them on
the walls of the buildings, absolutely. But so the bad news is when you're that far north and it's the wintertime, there's almost no sunlight. It's real bad.
Yeah.
And, we have that here. Even where we live, we're not that far north, but we have massive swings. We have very, very long days in the summer and much, much shorter days in the winter. And of course, as you go farther north, that gets more pronounced.
I think if you looked at my solar generation on my little roof here, 3.3 kilowatts, I think it was about a fifth of the generation in December, partly because December is cloudy here and the summer is sunny. That has a lot to do with it too.
But here's the good news. Guess what happens in the summertime then? It's
constant sunlight.
It's constant sunlight.
Constant
now, it
solar generation.
Going to be weaker because of, like I said, the angle of it and whatnot. But yeah, in the summertime, the first thing that I thought of was, the depths of winter. It's like, well, you're not going to get a lot of sun. But in the summer, it's the land of the midnight sun. You can be generating solar power probably 24 hours a day on some of those, longest days.
So do they use diesel generators for the winter and solar in the summer, or is they going to put up some wind?
Yeah. So right now, these communities, and there's lots of them, northern remote communities, they're generally run almost, 100% on diesel generators. So they are, for now, going to keep the diesel generator, but they think that these panels and batteries, of course, solar panels and batteries, it's going to reduce the emissions by about 70%. So they'll still need the diesel generator for about 30% of the time. But the next thing will, of course, be to add some wind. So they're a little nervous about doing that because the Arctic conditions, they're not quite sure yet how the cold is going to affect the wind turbines, but that's the next step, is they're going to start working with wind. And I'm sure there's a way to winterize your wind turbines so that they can work when it's minus 40. But many, many remote communities around the world are powered by diesel generators, and it's going to be more difficult in these kind of northern places, but all this can be absolutely replaced with wind, solar, and batteries.
And there's a lot of places in the Canadian Shield up north, the tundra, where there's mines in the middle of nowhere, and they fly in and they build a strip and they come and go. But you could set up solar to offset the diesel, because it's hard to get diesel there. You got to fly in the diesel. Yeah. In a lot of cases. So it's just easier.
And we've talked about it, like places like Hawaii even, right? Like Hawaii we reported on the show, they had their last shipment of coal. Places like Hawaii have been shipping in tons of fossil fuels just to burn it and then need to ship in more. So any isolated place, including something like Hawaii, they need to get their own energy security. So more batteries, more wind, more solar, and then eventually no fossil fuels.
Well, that's very exciting. And I've heard of, indigenous communities in northern Canada, in the Arctic, doing that as well to offset their diesel use. And I think if they put up a wind turbine or two and tested it and got some data on that and what is needed for the extreme cold, then, we're good to go.
Yeah.
It's time for the lightning round.
The lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
From the Washington Post, most feel comfortable living near wind and solar, according to surveys, but not near nuclear. 75% of Americans are comfortable living near solar farms. 68% are comfortable about living close to wind farms. And I don't know why it's not 100% living close to solar, because it's, unless it's ruining the view of your hill nearby, then I can understand that. But as far as nuclear goes, it's only 33% are comfortable.
Gee,
and
I
to
wonder
those 33%,
why that is.
I say, why are you comfortable living next to nuclear?
Yeah, what are those people thinking?
44% of them are Republicans and 25% of Democrats. So it's actually closer about the whole nuclear thing as far as party affiliation goes. New York State has announced a $100 million fund to help schools buy zero-emission school buses. Good to hear. We know there's all kinds of advantages to school buses being electric.
Yeah, and that adds to incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act as well.
From Bloomberg, BYD, the Chinese auto manufacturer, is poised to overtake Tesla in EV sales as the world's biggest seller for electric vehicles. China's best-selling car brand came within about 3,000 vehicles or so of toppling Tesla last quarter. Now there's been a slowdown with Tesla a little bit, but, that's the trend right now.
That's fascinating. They should be probably neck and neck for a while because both are expanding as rapidly as they can.
The first version 4 Tesla superchargers are showing up. What do you think, Brian? Have you seen them online?
Yeah, it looks great. So Tesla Bjorn, is that his name, in Norway? Yeah. He went and visited a site in Norway that's got 20 of the version 3 superchargers and then 20 of the version 4. And in Norway, they've started opening these up to non-Teslas, and they all have the CCS connector over there. So it's a bit of a charging paradise. And looks like it's working great. And the version 4 Tesla superchargers, they have a longer cable, but there is still going to be issues with other cars because other cars have their charging ports in a different location. So the Tesla chargers are made to go in the rear, the left corner. So there's still going to be issues like that, but it's a brave new world.
Ioniq 5 sales advanced by 203% year over year in September. Brian, are the Koreans actually starting to make cars and make them available for sale? Is that happening now, finally?
It sounds like it. I mean, it sounds like, everyone's production is up, but we are starting to maybe run up against the limits of demand at a certain point. Volkswagen put out a press release that they were pausing production of the ID3 because they, demand issues, which was a bit surprising. But it's going to be this balancing act of making more, but making sure there's customers for it.
Yeah, I guess there's some consumer confidence issues with the economy and where it's going and things like that. And maybe now is not the best time to buy a car for some people. Oh, it's time for a CES Fast Fact. Heat pumps sold over 30 years contributed to a minus 72% drop in CO2 emissions from heating in Finland. 83% in Norway, and 95% in Sweden, says Carbon Brief. The oil center of the United States, Houston, Texas, is asking the federal government to build a multi-billion-dollar dike to protect it from climate change. Karma. From Carbon Brief, having the reliance on meat and dairy could cut land use emissions by 31%. So if we just cut that in half, Brian, cut that in half, we will reduce it by 31%.
Right. When you say having, you mean having, like cutting it in half.
Batteries already cost significantly less than what was predicted for 2030 just 2 years ago, finds a new study from MCC Berlin, which is studying this stuff. This was on Carbon Brief. So a couple of years ago, they predicted what the battery prices in 2030 would fall to, and they've already fallen that far. So, yeah, that's kind of the moral of our podcast. From Tesla accountant on Twitter, he sent me a several-year-old article saying that my refinery, the one I'm always talking about, the one that stinks up my house and is killing me, gives off 10 times the VOCs than any other refinery in Canada. 10 times.
Oh, that's not good.
It's the only one that is next to a city. Residential houses are feet away from it. I'm about 2 kilometers or about, I don't know, a mile or something like that. But
well, as I believe I've said on the show before, but there was an incident like 20 years ago or so where there was some type of exhaust and it was literally peeling the paint off of people's cars.
Right. Yeah, that's that's not good. If it peels the paint off your car, what's it doing to your lungs and your bloodstream? Anyway, finally this week, on a positive note, MIT scientists, aren't they always doing something, Brian? Those boys and girls at MIT, they've designed a solar-powered desalination system that turns salt water into drinkable water at higher volume and lower cost. When seawater is exposed to air, sunlight drives water to evaporate. Once the water leaves the surface, salt remains. And the higher the salt concentration in the water, the denser the liquid and the heavier water wants to flow downward. So they mimic this in a sort of a fake kilometer-wide phenomenon in a small box, and that can take advantage using gravity and the sun to make purified water without the salt. And it's cheaper. They're saying it's cheaper than just fresh water.
Well, we keep talking about how we're the early days of all of this stuff, even solar panels, even wind turbines. This is the first generation of many of these kind of technologies, and they're just going to get better.
And that's the lightning round for this week.
Yeah, and that is our show for this week. Please take the time to contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, and on social media, Clean Energy Pod.
Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and our TikTok channel, which is rocking along. If you're not signed up, sign up. Follow us. Have a look at the Clean Energy store if you'd like our merchandise. We've got some shirts there. And the link is in your show notes. Everything's in your show notes. There's millions of ways to contact us and leave us voicemails. But Everything's there in your show notes if you care to look. And if you're new to the show, we always ask to subscribe or follow on your podcast app to get new episodes delivered every week. And the new James, we'll see you again next week.
See you next week.